Hey, thanks for checking out Nuts and Bolts with Tone. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to tell you how to replace a steering gear or a power steering gearbox. Now the vehicle that I'm working on is a 04 Dodge Cummins. I think it's like a 3/4 ton or a 1 ton, I'm not sure. It's the same thing, either truck. But basically the principle of replacing a gearbox is the same. It's the same steps that you're going to take. The only difference is how you get to different components. Now in this one here, we're going to go through the wheel well to access the gearbox and the power steering lines. In a Duramax, in a Power Stroke, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to remove the wheel liner, and that's going to give you access to the gearbox. It's going to give you access to the power steering lines, where you can get them disconnected. And in some of them, you know, I think in a Duramax, you have to take off the charge air pipe on the driver's side, I think. They're all different in little variations. But for the most part, it's the same thing. You're gonna lock the steering wheel down. I'm gonna show you how to do that. I do that with the seat belt. You're gonna disconnect the lines. You're gonna access the gearbox. You're gonna take the gearbox out, put it on the ground, make sure it's centered, and reinstall it the same way you took it out. So let's get into it. Let me show you how to replace a steering gear. Let's go. All right, here we go. We're gonna replace a steering gear. I'm gonna tell you how to replace a steering gear. It's the same way in all trucks, just a different way of getting to things. In this one here, first step is obviously going to be securing the steering wheel. I use a seat belt. Put it through the steering wheel to keep the steering wheel from turning once the steering shaft is disconnected. Keep your clock spring from turning. The next step is going to be gaining access to the pinch bolt for the steering shaft, which is right down there, and also disconnecting the lines. So the first thing you're going to do is suck out the power steering fluid. I mean, you could disconnect the lines and let it all run down. Or you can suck it out and get as much out as possible, so not as much runs down the steering gear. In this one, I'm going to go ahead and suck it out, and all right, change of plans on this Cummins here. I can't get the bottle out without disconnecting the upper radiator hose, and I'm not touching the coolant. And so from here, I took out the wheel well, so you just have 3 Torx here, and then a bunch of 8s all the way around. This fender flare here comes off, and it's about like 7 or 8 8mm bolts come out, and then the whole wheel well comes out. Pretty easy, lots of room here. So now I'm gonna get in here, and there's the lines right there I need to disconnect, okay? And the steering shaft I think I'm still gonna get from underneath. But basically, every vehicle is the same. You need to gain access to the power steering lines, gain access to the pinch bolt, and disconnect all of it. After we get everything disconnected, there's the 3 bolts right there that bolt the gearbox up. We need to lift it up and take the pitman arm off, disconnect it from the steering component, and then sometimes it's easier to just leave the pitman arm on, and then on the ground take the pitman arm off. Usually with a hammer, you can hit the pitman arm and get it to pop off without a puller. So let me get these lines disconnected, get the pinch bolt out, and get the steering disconnected. I think I'm gonna lift it up and disconnect the steering first and the pinch bolt, so that way I'm not getting covered in power steering fluid. Because that way from here, I'm going to put a pan under it and disconnect these power steering lines. So let me get this up in the air and get those components disconnected. One more thing to consider before you start disconnecting stuff is, how is the gearbox going to come out? In this case, the gearbox is going to come out, and it's going to come out right through here. But in some vehicles, the steering is right here, and you have to disconnect a lot of components to get the gearbox out. This one's actually going to be pretty simple to get out. There's the pinch bolt for the steering shaft. Okay, so we're going to take that out and take that nut off right there, and disconnect this tie rod. I'm actually replacing that whole tie rod right there, the inner and, oh wait, no. Okay, I'm replacing just this inner right here. It's got a lot of play right there and the boot's busted. And I'm also replacing this inner tie rod here, or it's a center link actually. So we're gonna disconnect it there, pop it loose. All right, let me get this steering stuff off of here so we can get this gearbox out. You also wanna look at how your pitman arm is oriented, because you got your steering wheel centered, all right, to make sure it doesn't move. Okay, let me get this disconnected and see where we're at. Okay, now that we got everything out of the way, I'm gonna leave the pitman arm on. This one has a lot of room, but I'm gonna leave it on so I can knock it off on the ground. So now we've got the steering shaft out. So we're gonna take a pry bar and we're gonna wiggle this and slide it back up. Sometimes you gotta spray a little WD-40 in there or some rust spray to get this to lubricate, to slide up. I always mark any steering shaft I disconnect just so I have a reference point of where it was when I started in case it moves when I take it out. Because if this turns a little bit, it can mess you up. Gearboxes aren't so much because they're splined much larger. So we're gonna wiggle this and pull this back, then we're gonna drop it down, disconnect the lines, and then we're gonna unbolt it and we're gonna put it on the ground, and then we're gonna knock this pitman arm off. And I'm actually just gonna hit it with a hammer right here, and it's gonna pop off on the ground. F450s and 550s, that's how I do the gearbox also. The pitman arm is so hard to get off that a big sledgehammer is the easiest way on the ground. So let me get that off and get these lines disconnected, and let's get this gearbox out. Oh, before I forget, so always remember when you disconnect any steering component, always count your turns when you're taking it off. So when you put it back, you know it's back where it was. If you're off by a few turns, it can really throw your front end off. So I disconnected here and I disconnected that one. I'll be replacing those and putting them back exactly where they were on these adjusting sleeves. Make sure you only disconnect the side you're taking off. Sometimes you need to spray some rust spray in there, some WD-40. You need to use a torch sometimes. This one came off pretty easy. I left this side connected and tight so it didn't move. All right, just a little tip on the steering components. All right, here we go. Oh, look at that. Black Widow. All right, time to kill him. All right, let's go. All right, here we go. Before I take this out, one last little tip is always make sure you replace your O-rings right here. Some power steering lines don't have O-rings where it goes into the gearbox, and others do. This one, I was able to tuck this line over here on the frame, outside the frame. And the other one, I was able to pull, you can see it hanging right here. I was able to pull it down and get it out of the way. Here's the gearbox. I'm gonna unbolt this and just drop it down, get it on the ground, and get this pitman arm off. The O-rings for power steering are generally always the same size. Every once in a while there's a small one, but they're almost always the same size. All right. All right, and on this one I was wrong. This one actually has two size O-rings. They're not the same. So the first thing you wanna do is do a visual and make sure your gearbox looks correct, all right? The next thing you want to do is you want to check your alignment of your steering shaft. So this one here is about even with this section right here. So I'm going to look at this one and it's right here. So I got to turn it just a little bit. All right. The next thing that you want to look at is the amount of splines on your shaft here. This one has 4. Okay. There's some vehicles that I've had where one gearbox has 4. And one has 3, and that's what makes it the different gearbox. So you want to just double check and make sure, because your pitman arm has 4 on this one. This has 4, so it needs a gearbox that has 4. So double check that. All right, now I'm going to just make sure that this gearbox is centered, and I'm going to get this pitman arm on, and I was able to get it off by just hitting it with a hammer. I hit it right here and right there, and it popped off. All right, I'm gonna get this on and get new O-rings and get it installed. Okay, so the only thing I didn't show you is what kind of tools you need. You're gonna just need basic tools, you know, a half inch ratchet to break the bolts loose if you don't have air tools. The gearbox bolts are pretty tight. Make sure you really tighten them up. Most of the time they have Loctite on them. In this specific Cummins that I did, the gearbox came with new bolts. So be real careful, because in the one that I did, the bolts were like this much longer and one of the bolts didn't work. And so I just used all the old bolts. I've never actually had a gearbox come with bolts, so this is the first time. Just if you get bolts, really look at them and to see if it'll work. So the things that you're gonna need are you're gonna need a set of flare nut, line wrench, flare nut wrenches to get to the power steering lines. You don't want them to round off, but usually, I mean, one quick and you can break them loose. And in some cases, you have to use just a regular crow's foot because maybe you don't have a line wrench that's big enough to fit around the gearbox. In the Cummins I did, one of the lines was too big, and my flare nuts didn't work, and so I had to use one of these, and it broke it loose. So a lot of times you have to use this with a little universal wobble and an extension to get in there to break it loose. So that's really all you're going to need to do the gearbox. Now, one tip that I like to do is what I'll do is I'll fill the fluid up, and I usually overfill it a little bit, and you're gonna do just to start it real quick and then turn it right back off because it's gonna suck that fluid right in there, and then top it off again, and then start it again, and then turn it off. Now, power steering fluid is tested with the vehicle off, so you don't want it running. I don't like to have it running while I'm adding fluid because a lot of times you get air bubbles and it's just not going to work right. Plus it makes noise. You don't want to damage the pump from running with air in it. I had a power stroke one time that the first couple power steering pumps I put in when I bled it, because I let it run too long with not enough fluid, it made noise and it never went away. And so I had to do it the right way, which is Ford has a weird way. You have to use a vacuum cap and you have to suck up from the reservoir and start it up, and it's a procedure. I'll make a video on that next time I do one on a Ford. But anyways, on a gearbox, and then you're just going to run the steering wheel back and forth, and you'll notice it'll make noise, it'll get less and less, and then at the very end you'll have just a little bit of noise on each end, and then that's pretty much it. And then, you know, go drive it and then make sure you double check your fluid. So replacing gearboxes isn't incredibly difficult, but this is how you do it. So thanks for watching the video. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and hit the bell to get notified of all my future content. Also check me out on Instagram at Nuts and Bolts with Tone for my daily life as a mechanic. You can check out my merchandise store where you can get yourself a t-shirt or a coffee cup, a little water bottle, support Nuts and Bolts. But thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time.